Hi there, and thank you for clicking on my video. Going to be doing a remake of yesterday's video. Um, Due to me not liking what the exception is, I'm going to be talking about Oberon. Oberon Prime is coming up in the new rotation that's coming up in a bit. Make sure to go farm Saren and then Akana Prime. If you haven't, you only got a couple more days. But the next prime rotation is going to be, I believe, Oberon and Equinox, I think. But either way, it's Oberon. And we're going to be talking about modding and changing your elements on your weapon through ability buffs. Going to be a broader topic to encompass all of the other things. But specifically, we're going to be talking about Helminths mainly. Through the Helminth system, you're able to take abilities by sacrificing a non-primed frame, and you will gain the ability to put a specified pre-selected ability onto any other frame with only a couple minor exceptions. Like you can't do with a frame that has a strength buff with another strength buff. So things like Roar and I think Eclipse are out. I know there's one with it's the buffing abilities. But specifically, we're going to be talking about Oberon. His helmet ability is Smite, so this goes for any other weapon that you're using, and we're going to be talking about changing mods mid-mission. The example that I used yesterday, and it's going to be our starting off point, we have Smite with the Smite Infusion mod. This is going to cost you a mod slot. The next one won't. Smite Augment, hold to cast will grant all allies within 15 meters an additional 100% radiation damage to their attacks for 40 seconds. Obviously buffed a bit because we have primed continuity. Nourish, add toxin damage to buffed squad members' attacks. And the one that you all hit me up on, keeping me straight, I don't like the ability, so I kind of like washed it from my mind, is Thermal Sunder. We will get into that later. So the usage for this, like the straight up utility, if you see, we deal impact, slash, and electric. The slash is from the 100 munitions proc. Electricity and impact are innate on the weapon. The damage is kind of lackluster. But once it gets scaled up, it gets pretty nasty. 400k, 260k. But that's because these guys are kind of weak in the scheme of things. 700k. But one of the things that we have the ability to do is by activating Nourish and gaining the, in the top right, you can see what the buff is, 170%. But more importantly, I gain Corrosive, which changes what would normally be a electric proc because of a hanging electric base element. It turns it into corrosive, and I gain the raw damage equivalent of corrosive because the toxin and electricity combine. So, oh, sorry, not 100 munitions. I was using internal bleeding. So even though I have not modded for any elements on this weapon, I have the ability to turn this electricity proc, or this electricity weighting, into corrosive by combining it with Nourish, because Nourish acts like a mod on your weapon. So I have the ability in the middle of the mission to toggle back and forth between a stronger raw damage, corrosive, and a dot electricity. What's the utility behind this, ultimately? If you are using a dot build, one of the things you have to sacrifice, and I will try to draw this better than I did the last time. One of the things that you have to, there we go, is you have time, you have damage. So here is 1 second. Before 1 second, with the exception of electricity and gas, so on the foeman, it's not that big of a deal. And for nourish, it benefits weapons with base electricity on it, but it also benefits like the 2 weapons that deal magnetic. But more importantly, magnetic is something you can get on Kuva and Tenet weapons. So if you want to build something that's a dot machine, you can build full dot on a weapon that's magnetic and then deal toxin procs, kill with toxin procs, by building full dot on your weapon using the base magnetic to boost your like raw damage, but still kill with a toxin proc, because the 170% counts like a normal mod. So 170 is pretty dang good. It's stronger than a primed mod. So in terms of damage, there's a bunch of damage, and this is another way to increase your damage a significant amount. So generally, with the exception of gas and electric, before 1 second, raw damage is king. Dot damage, and raw damage deals damage in chunks. Smaller chunks, though more with like full auto weapons, and then you have stuff like a corrosive Kuva Shakur, which is meant to just one tap something. So for raw damage, generally before 1 second, raw damage is king of the one shot. You would never build a dot on a one shot thing. Okay, I just thought about it. The Queller, for those of you that do disruption runs, you would build for raw damage. You would never build like a hunter munitions build, which is something that benefits more on like full auto weapons, where you're killing with literally the weight of the bullets, and you're not trying to one tap something. But with dot builds, they generally don't do any damage for 1 second. Again, gas is the exception, and we'll do blue for electric. They start immediately. So there's actually like 2 ways you can build them. You can either build them for boosting the electric incredibly high, like really pushing into it for a dot build. Or you could actually do like a bullet hose method for electric, and it would count as like pseudo bonus damage, if you will. The procking on the first thing, right? But generally it takes dots, and we'll do orange for that, 1 second to start dealing damage. So the enemy, unless you have something that changes its mind, is generally just going to be looking at you for a second. And then these take off. And generally, dot damage does do better in terms of like per hit, how much damage do you do, or how much effective damage do you do per hit. Dot damage is better because of the way Smite mods interact with it. That being said, raw damage does have its place. So this build, when you mod using abilities and adjust your modding, allows you to almost gain the best of both worlds. And I'll come back to Thermal Sunder in a second. So even though I am a full dot build, I even have a Riven that's multi-shot and just more faction damage. I can swap over to corrosive. Now, why is this sort of a thing? All right, so we have nourish. We're dealing corrosive. We're getting the benefit of our dots and the raw damage. Is this is super helpful on Deadhead builds? Because it allows you to toggle on and off between raw damage, which would allow you to prime your Deadhead more, and then gain the ability of swapping over to your dot build with the sorry, let me take a drink of water. This would allow you to prime your Deadhead, because the dots won't trigger it, because dots don't trigger Deadhead, even if it's a headshot. Right? But now I have a Deadhead strike. So it would help you get your dot build up, but still be able to lean in to those slash procs if that's how you're building on an electric weapon. Now, obviously, there's a bunch of different weapons that have different elements on it. This would allow you to say something like the Silva and Aegis, where it's a heat weapon. This would allow you to mod for gas without actually having it on the weapon. So one of the ways that you increase the damage potential of whatever your damage dealing weapon is sort of offloading the mods onto something else. And this is something that's not really talked about too much, and it's part of the reason why I wanted to talk about it specifically, is that say for like a melee build, right? One of the ways that you would increase the damage of a melee is by removing the attack speed and putting Arcane Strike on your frame. And you would either have to make the decision to have 2 attack speed mods, or it would give you the ability. So this setup right here would require Arcane Strike. Or sometimes, depending on what you're doing, like the Talia Boltes, because of how high its attack speed is innately, like there's no attack speed on this weapon, and its attack speed is still 1.7. You might be fine with that. Sometimes I run with Arcane Strike on it, sometimes I don't. But by offloading the modding, it opens up room for another mod. So you can run on, say, like a slash-based melee. You would offload the attack speed, and it would free up a spot for your faction mod and still allow you to run double crit damage on your slash builds. You see what I'm saying? So by offloading mods, that's the effectiveness of this, is that I don't have any toxin mods on here. And obviously hammer shot isn't ideal, but it does help with the 2-tap, if you will, because we are running aptitude. But I was using this as like a hybrid, and it was before internal bleeding came out, but this is a somewhat meta build. So by changing the elements mid-mission, and Smite is going to be super helpful for this, is generally when you build, you really don't have access to specific combinations of elements and specific frames, but they're not Helminth abilities. You have Thermal Sunder, which gives you Blast. I don't know when you would ever want to do that. I think there's like a couple of bosses that are weak to Blast, and infested. There's an infested unit that's weak to blast, but it's like the health portion. So blast is so readily available on like explosive weapons, you would just take one of those, right? But with, say, this setup, you would be able, with an electric weapon, to mod for corrosive and radiation on a weapon that has neither. And normally with that combination, you wouldn't be able to do that. So it's not too important with the Gokstad officers, but say, if I can spell this right, bombards. These are the guys that kill you, right? They have the these are the special units that kill you. But normally you don't run a weapon with radiation against like the Grineer. So with Smite, I can cast and hold Smite to activate it with the mod, giving me radiation damage. And Nourish will combine, because it's a base element, with the electric on the weapon and give me corrosive radiation. Which is a combination that I would not normally have, allowing me to kill these guys pretty easily. And I forget exactly what the value is, but these guys have a really high effective health pool. I think it's like 3-4 million. But yet here we are one-shotting them. Obviously the viral helps. But that's one of the ways Smite specifically is going to be super helpful against Grineer, because it will allow you to, and it's the Helminth ability, so you can put it onto your whatever warframe you want if you have Oberon farmed up, and it will make doing a raw damage build against the Grineer significantly easier. And then you can swap back to your dot-based build when the timer runs out. Obviously, you're going to have to keep track of how long it lasts. And keep in mind it's an AoE. And the AoE, and we'll talk about that now. Obviously, it's on Gauss. I can't use the other one. Okay, thermal transfer. Okay. So we have electricity. Now we have heat. And we'll get the bonus damage. Okay, 1 second. Actually, let me exit the simulacrum. It didn't like that I swapped frames. The conditional didn't apply. I mean, I'm obviously getting the bonus damage. Alright, it's not letting me proc the the radiation damage. But you can see the blast damage from the combination being procced. So it will allow you to mod heat or cold onto your weapon, and if you do both, it'll mod for blast. But it has to be a hanging element. So it's not going to pull, and this is more important with the tenant weapons. If the weapon is, or if the element is combined already on the weapon itself, even if you have like a Kuva weapon or a tenant weapon where, say like the tenant agendas, for example, is impact electric innate. If it combines on the weapon to magnetic, and you do like Grendel's Nourish, it's not gonna pull the electric off to give you if it's magnetic progenitor with an innate electric, it's one of the few weapons that can get like that unique combo. It's not going to pull in the mission the electricity out of the magnetic to give you magnetic corrosive. You would have to mod for that. In which case, it would just help with the weighting. If that's important to you, obviously that's a niche. I am not a super big fan of this ability, though. Reason being is, obviously it's a good meme with Harrow, right? Helminth that onto his 1. But not many people are going to be able to see this and know the difference of it. Like, if you're running through a mission and somebody runs through this, you could mess up their damage scaling. If they went like with a corrosive heat build, obviously the bonus heat's going to help them, but say like that, right? They're not going to notice this, and all of a sudden they'll be doing corrosive blast, which obviously doesn't do anything. While the other ones are instant casts, they do have a radius to them. But obviously, when you're doing something and you're dump statting everything else to buff that as much as possible, that radius is going to be super tiny. And generally, if you're running in like a group, hopefully you're not one of those people. If you do decide to do the thermal Sunder build, because that is a Helminth also, so you can do pretty interesting combinations. Like obviously, you could do radiation cold, radiation heat on Oberon, and you would also have the ability to do the electricity, was it shock, and the augment from Volt. His 1 is a Helminth also, so that would give you all 4 core elements, all 4 base elements, and the bonus in the top right is weighted like a mod. So with this, it actually, like say Nourish, for example, provides easily a weighting more than the Prime Toxin mod on your melee. If you're doing, say, like a radiation build, which is kind of relevant considering the Archons, you can, with Oberon and Zadas, boost the living crap out of the radiation damage, and it will allow Oberon to one-tap an Archon. So that's definitely like a way you can, increase the damage. Obviously, I'm going to skip the Eidolon discussion, because that was sort of a meta for a really brief, but I'm pretty sure it's still Volt Eclipse, right? So this is sort of a PSA. This is how, if you need to, in certain circumstances, it's more effective against the Grineer. Another thing you could do, it's a thing, okay? Where's it, the Batacore? Yeah, the Batacore has magnetic on the weapon. With the exception of the Tenant and the Kuva weapons, where you can actually progenate magnetic. I think this is the only weapon that actually has it. That's a primary. And it's actually on the main fire. But don't quote me on that. So you can do magnetic electricity. You could do magnetic corrosive without modding for it. With only modding for the electricity portion, which is going to help your DPS significantly. It allows you to add even more stats with for the galvanized aptitude to chew on with 100 munitions. So it will help. Magnetic corrosive is a pretty potent combo against Corpus for like more raw damage builds. You would also have the ability to, like just with the Oberon that we have, mod for radiation as well. Actually, let's grab Oberon. So with the Batacore, there's our 4 statuses. Four new statuses with the viral from the Panzer. And, oh, hold on. We'll get bonus damage from the viral. But I'm pretty sure these guys are immune. And it'll help with the raw damage. So we're actually getting a pretty sizable multiplier. Over, well, 170% and 140 on something that's really not modded for elemental. It's probably almost triple the damage. So even with Prime Smite Corpus, or Prime Bane Corpus, it's still able to kill them. Mostly with 100 munitions. Also keep in mind this elemental modding is not going to increase your 100 munitions procs. But it can help change things up. So, say if you're doing like a Corpus build and you come into a Fissure, the corrupted enemies are a thing. This would allow you to adapt your build on the spot in the mission to deal with them. Because you're going to have a bunch of corrupted units, but you still want to be able to kill the Corpus units from the mission itself. So, food for thought. Just to go over the couple others, because you have the heat. There is a heat equivalent of Smite and like for each of the base mods or the base elements, there is a frame that has an ability that allows you to add that element to your weapon as modded damage. Frost has cold, Volt has electricity, Ember has heat, Grendel has nourish, and Grendel is the only one that doesn't require a mod for it. So that's pretty nice. Then you also have radiation from Oberon and corrosive from Saren. Toxic Lash does not count as modded damage. It is a final damage multiplier. So literally whatever the hit is. So say if you do like 10,000 damage, that's what the dot is. And it's a ratio of that, right? But the corrosive damage boost requires an augment on Saren. Actually, let's just take a look at that. Spores. Yeah, it requires an augment. Venom dose. I drew a blank on it. But this is not our Helminth. Molter Helminth. So for this, you could theoretically swap out Miasma for a if you don't want to run Roar, or say you don't care to farm Rhino, but you have Oberon. If you have Oberon from before them moving him to Railjack, so obviously this will be a more experienced player. You could run Saren on like a buffer Saren and run corrosive radiation on whatever weapon you want. Say like a pure slash build, and run a buffer Saren and have Smite on the 4, and it would destroy, right? And you would have the bonus radiation damage, the bonus corrosive damage, and then you would have Toxic Lash on top of it. And you could practically run with absolutely nothing on your weapon itself. So, food for thought. Just wanted to put a little PSA out there because I see in the clan and alliance people sort of like worried about the prime mods. The strongest thing in the game is literally your operator. Okay? The strongest thing in the game is your operator. The next thing is your frame. And the one after that is literally the weapons. Okay? The operator is the strongest thing in the game. So, if you're lacking on a mod, or say you're maybe a little forma-starved, or you're really intent on doing the free-to-play thing, God bless you if you are. You can generally Helminth your way out of it now. Or, you know, be a Grendel playing Chad. But it's one of the ways you can boost the damage of your weapons, and it allows for incredibly interesting combos. So, heat and cold you can get from Thermal Sunder. I'm not a fan of it because it affects other players and it leaves that AoE. And generally, in like, if somebody's getting used to Star Chart and they're like less than like MR, say like, I don't know, 23, not to call anybody out, but if you're moving quickly through a mission, like an exterminate, and you're casting the heat portion of Thermal Sunder, people generally won't register that the modding on their weapon has changed. They might look at it, know what it does, but if you're moving quickly through a mission, they're not going to think, oh, my corrosive heat primary all of a sudden doesn't have a dot now. So I'm not too big of a fan of it because it's too easy for people to run through it. And I've noticed that people sort of have the tendency to run through it naturally, or the person running it is running an insane range as an AoE nuke, right? So it's food for thought. This is something the changing elements mid-mission, adding radiation to corrosive weapons through Helminthing on Smite. Obviously, it requires a mod slot. And it requires a weapon that has electricity on it. But this is one of the ways you can fit faction damage easily onto a weapon, is by taking off one of the elemental mods. Like with this, you can take off fire rate and export it to the frame. Arcane acceleration, so that's where our fire rate is. Obviously, we would lose the punch through, so depending on what you value. And you could fit another mod here. You know what I mean? So it's one of the ways you can further increase the damage of whatever you're doing. Like, say, you could fit Galvanized Scope easily onto here now. So it's food for thought. This will give you some flexibility. This is one of the ways you can increase damage further and allow you, depending on the situation, to deal with specific enemies or mod for a troubling element and still gain the benefit of like a scaling dot. So say magnetic. Magnetic and toxin takes up 3 mod slots, right? Well, you could just mod, take off voltage, and mod like this for magnetic and use Nourish to get Toxin onto it. So you would gain the benefit of the raw damage because this weapon has innate magnetic. So you would mod for magnetic here. You would be able to mod for magnetic, and then you would be able to get the benefit of the dots. And you would have room for your faction mod because the fire rate is on the frame. So it's a way of saving mod spots. So effectively with this, we have 9 mods. Technically this counts as 2 more, right? So we have the 9 mods, 10 and 11. And then we have Toxin for 12 from Nourish. And Radiation is another element, so that would be another 2 elements. So that would be 12, 13, 14. And then Fire Rate on the frame for 15. So we would have 15 things on our frame benefiting the primary instead of the normal 8 plus an Exilus. So it would be 8, 9, 10, 11. So we would gain the benefit of what? 4 more benefits to this weapon. And this would be a way of sort of supercharging it and getting that damage to, say, the next level to make running Steel Path incredibly easy. Because anybody can do Steel Path. I'm kind of proud of the community, kind of proud of the clan and alliance, where Steel Path is, I think, finally viewed as like the default mission type. People understand, clear the star chart, do the quests, get through the Zeraman, get your weapons, and then go to Steel Path. And then that's your default. I'm noticing that more and more, where the Steel Path is like finally considered the default mission node to do. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact of Steel Path relics. Because obviously farming Steel Essence at the same time. Like I was farming Steel Essence for hours today just to get my amounts back up. I was an idiot and I spent it all in Kuva. Should have done relic packs. But anyway, I think that is enough. Let me just check the comment section from the last video. Thermal transfer. That was the big one. I'm honestly, like, I was trying to make it pretty upfront with Oberon specifically. That was the best combo, is to do Smite and Nourish. But thermal transfer is definitely there. It's just, I feel like, because it's something that gets left on the ground and the tendency of people to run through the pools, it's a lot easier for you to innately remember what's going on with your frame, but somebody else running through it, it's not enough of a difference for people to see the augment. And let me show you that. Right? Like, there's definitely a difference. Right? So you see this sort of collapses in. That's the heat. That's the cold. And when you run through it, it's not a big deal, right? Because there's no augment. Actually, let's do heat and then we'll swap out. Alright, so heat. See, there's sort of the additional ring. I just don't feel like it's enough of a difference for somebody who's not used to playing with Gauss to run through it and not know that there's a difference. Like, even me, when I'm playing and I am running through, if there's like one buff like this, obviously I'm going to see it because it's like, oh, there's something blue up there. But if you're playing with like a squad, you could have 5 to 10 buffs on you at any time. especially once arcanes start proccing, you could have a ton of crap up there. And God forbid you're playing with an Octavia. You're never going to notice that. Especially if you're running with like conditional mods or whatever, and especially the new arcanes with like the triggers and whatnot. You're never going to notice that. So I think it was just a bit much. At least with the Smite, it's a second tier combined element, so it's not going to hurt other people having that on their weapon, even though it's going to mess up the disposition a little bit. They're still going to end up doing more damage. But the hanging elements, and I guess maybe it's if it was something like corrosive or whatnot. Blast just isn't a good element. You can make it put in work, but with Gauss, it seems like it makes your choice of adopting which element you want somebody else's problem. Where, say, like Grendel, it is still an AoE. It is still an AoE. But you can dump stat that. If you're really heavily leaning into that buff, you can dump stat it to where the AoE is really tiny. And the AoE is only there for like an instant cast. So you can play and like not have it interact with other people. And it seems like Gauss doesn't get the benefit of that. Because if you're running like a ton of duration and strength to try to lean into it, that guy's going to be there for a bit, and you could, like, you don't even have the option of jumping up, which is generally how I would do it, right? So, with the other ones where you cast it up there, it just leaves, like, a trailing bonus up there that most people aren't going to register. So it's a flavor for me, impact on like other people. Obviously, if I'm playing with other people that know what's going on, that's different. But in terms of pug runs, it just seems like it's a little too impactful for my taste. And also, it combines to make blast. Obviously, you're going to want to use the heat, right? But this impacts other people too much, where the other ones are instant cast. So I tried to ignore it, but obviously you guys caught it. Smart group. So Jabani 97, I did include Thermal Sunder, but there's a reason why I didn't want to talk about it. But it's true. So you would be able to, with the same thing, having corrosive, electric, and heat, cold, toxin, and electric. 2 of them will come from Thermal Sunder. And Nourish gives you toxin. And Shock from Volt will give you electricity. And you can change your elements up using those. Obviously, the frames that have combo elements on them, so say Oberon for radiation, Sarin for corrosive, will be able to pull off some very interesting combos, like viral corrosive pretty easily, which is a pretty insane combo. Would also be able to do corrosive magnetic pretty easily, and then do a toxin dot on top of it. So say like Sarin could gain the benefit of that, right? So for stuff like that, food for thought. I think that's enough for this video. Hopefully it's enough of a recap. Question, comment, concerns, leave me a comment. This isn't really anything I've seen anybody talk about in terms of the combo elements. And then on top of all of that, Nourish actually affects some Morphame abilities, which might be my next video. Then you have the arcanes from the kit guns, which also layer into abilities also, and your weapon. So it gets pretty crazy. You can actually fit like all of the elements onto like a Saren. So which is pretty nuts to think about. So anyway, have a blessed day, guys. Thank you for watching the video if you got it all the way through. Tell me how you think the recap worked out. Have a blessed day, guys.